Hello everyone, it's Jonny Khatru, and today's video is about my first listen to Bicicleta by Serú Girán. It's their third album, and it was released in 1980. This continues my journey as a prog rock fan through the 70s progressive jazz rock scene of Argentina. You can find other videos in this series on my channel about albums by bands such as Crucis, Spinetas Invisible and Almendra, as well as Charly Garcia's La Máquina de Hacer Pájaros, of course, Serú Girán. And in fact, Grasa de las Capitales, which I did really enjoy on my first listen, has actually gone on to become one of my favorite albums. The 23rd of October 2021, Saturday this past weekend, was the 70th birthday of Charly García. So this seemed to be the perfect time to listen to some more Serú Girán. So please click the like button on this video for me, subscribe to the channel, and let's get into the album, Bicicleta by Serú Girán. The album opens with a 10-minute song written by Charly García called A los jóvenes de ayer, or To the Youth of Yesterday. The production sounds really nice from the start. The electric keyboard sound they're using in particular reminds me of the Genesis album Duke, which came out the same year. And like the song Duchess from that album, this song takes its time to build up an atmosphere. Production already sounding really nice. After this atmosphere building section, it moves into a more menacing tango-influenced movement. You know, some of the sequences here remind me of what I've heard of Astor Piazzolla, but with the fretless bass of Pedro Aznar taking the stage. Once Charly's vocals come in, they're as theatrical as they sometimes get, but the melody here seems to me to be influenced by classical music. Then the whole band is in and we get kind of a groovy section. Those slides on the bass. To round out the song, David Lebón unleashes one of his signature bluesy guitar solos. So as you can tell, it is quite a lot to take in, this song, on first listen. You know, it's compositionally pretty complex. But I did find plenty to enjoy in it, and I certainly thought it was an ambitious statement to open the album with. Track 2 is a song entirely written and sung by guitarist David Lebón called Cuánto tiempo más llevará, or How Much Longer Will It Take. Like his songs that appeared on Grasa de las Capitales, this one is more of an easygoing, smooth kind of rock. In this case, it seems to suggest to me a bit of a AOR direction, which makes sense considering this was released at the start of the 1980s. I think it works pretty nicely to contrast against the more complex composition of Charly's opening song. And I do enjoy David Lebón's voice, although he tends to croon in that AOR kind of style. I think he sings well and it sounds genuine to me. Oscar Moro's drumming is quick and tight, as impressive as ever, and Pedro Aznar puts his fretless bass all over this song, which I think keeps it from sounding too much like generic AOR. You know, it gives it that little bit of Serú Girán special sauce. The third track is called Canción de Alicia en el País, or Song of Alicia in the Land. It seems to be a reference to Alice in Wonderland, which in Spanish is called Alicia en el País de las Maravillas, Alice in the Land of Wonders. But I suppose the land being referred to here is probably Argentina, because this is apparently one of several songs Charly García wrote to criticize the dictatorship of Argentina at the time through metaphor, you know, in order to avoid censorship. It's another one of Charly's theatrical kind of songs, but I think this one has a lot of tension in the composition and some of the changes are alluringly dark. There's so much tension in it that I kept expecting it to explode at some point, although it never really did, although there were definitely points where it did up the intensity. A lot of drama building in this one. It felt to me like they were deliberately building up this tension in order to build an uncomfortable atmosphere around this song, which is probably to deliberately reflect the lyrics about the situation in Argentina. And I found it to be really strong and pretty effective in that way. By the time the song ends, it's with a pretty tragic sounding melody. So yeah, kind of a strange song, but I found it to be potent and very moving. Track 4 is an instrumental piece written by bassist Pedro Aznar, his only composition on this album in fact, and it's called Luna de Marzo, March Moon. I thought March Moon sounds surprisingly nice in English, no, with the alliteration. So of course I went into this one expecting some kind of fretless bass showcase, but instead it seems Pedro took to the synthesizer for this one, and a lovely synthesizer sound it is. I'm actually quite surprised that this is the only track we're getting from Pedro Aznar on this album, because his writing and singing on Paranoia y Soledad from Grasa de las Capitales was a big highlight on the album for me. In any case, I do appreciate that this short instrumental has some of that dark jazz atmosphere that I loved so much in the second half of Grasa de las Capitales. Sounds really nice, I only wish we had a bit more. Moving on to side B of the record, it opens with Mientras miro las nuevas olas, or While I Watch the New Waves. This one was written by Charly, and it's in his very theatrical style, of the kind that I found was very prominent on the Sui Generis album, Instituciones. The melody is very rock and roll, kind of glam, reminds me of something like Meatloaf or the soundtrack of the Rocky Horror Picture Show, that very kind of up-tempo rock. I have to say it's not really my style. It's a style that I was kind of glad didn't really show up on Grasa de las Capitales. The middle section of this song is quite pretty though. I especially enjoy the lovely fretless bass. That's nice. But on the whole, I find this song to just be a little bit corny. I think it's just not my cup of tea. Oh, they even got a woo 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 in there. Track 6, however, it's called Desarma y Sangra, Disarm and Bleed. And this is another Charly García composed track, but this one is completely different from the last one. It really shows Charly's creative range, because this one sounds more like a church hymn to me, with some beautiful classical influenced electric piano. This is actually one of my favorites on the album, along with Canción de Alicia en el País. And like that song, this one also has some really dramatic chord changes. It's a pretty emotional song, this one. It's definitely a side of Charly that I personally prefer, and I was really feeling this song. Track 7 is called Tema de Naila, Naila's song or Naila's theme. It's another one written by David Lebón, this one being dedicated to his daughter Naila, who had just recently been born and had nearly died at birth. And accordingly, David sings this song in a really passionate way. It reminds me of the singing style of Luis Alberto Spinetta more than what I'm used to hearing from Serú Girán. The majority of this song is taken up by a groovy yet beautiful jazz rock jam though. So apparently David was upset that Charly didn't visit him at the hospital with Naila, so he asked Spinetta's keyboardist at the time, Diego Rapaport, to come and play on this song. An uncomfortable situation perhaps, but I have to say, the keyboard playing on this track is pretty fantastic. Oscar Moro's drumming is in that tight jazzy mode that he does so well. Pedro Aznar's bass is groovy as hell, but yeah, Diego Rapaport really ripped this one up. And it's got me excited to hear his keyboard playing again when I get round to the first Spinetta Jade album. Track 8 is the last song on the album. It's called Encuentro con el Diablo, or Encounter with the Devil. And this one really comes out of nowhere. It's a very American sounding, funky, soul-inspired rocker. Very soul, This one is credited to both David Lebón and Charly García. It's sung by David Lebón. And supposedly, the band was jamming on Lynyrd Skynyrd's Sweet Home Alabama when they dove into this. And sure enough, the backing track does seem to resemble that Southern rock classic. But David Lebón seems to be channeling the soul of Stevie Wonder through his vocal performance. This is obviously very different to everything else on this more subtle and sophisticated album, but I think it works. David sings surprisingly well in this soul-inspired style. Maybe the brass hits towards the end were a step slightly too far, but hey, I think it's just a fun and upbeat way to close out the album. I went into this album with extremely high expectations. I really can't overstate how much I've come to love La Grasa de las Capitales. And while I mostly did enjoy Bicicleta, I can't say it really comes close to La Grasa de las Capitales for me, at least not after my first listen. Every track on here worked for me, more or less, with the exception of Mientras miro las nuevas olas, which is not really my kind of thing. But I don't think any track on here really hits as hard as the song La Grasa de las Capitales, nor do I really think there's anything that touches the beauty of something like Viernes 3 AM. But you know, I think that's probably one of the most beautiful songs I've ever heard, so it's not really fair. I do think that Charly contributed 2 extremely beautiful songs to this album, Canción de Alicia en el País and Desarma y Sangra, and I also think A los Jóvenes de Ayer is an incredible track. It's just pretty complex, and I think it needs a few more listens to really sink in for me. So while Bicicleta maybe doesn't hit the heights that Grasa de las Capitales did for me, I still think it's a really strong album in its own right. The next Charly García album I listen to will probably be 1984's Piano Bar, thanks to everyone who voted in the recent YouTube poll. One of the first albums from Argentina I ever listened to was Charly's Clics, Modernos, and I loved that album. But it's been quite a while since I heard it, so I'm quite keen to dip back into Charly's 80s solo career. Let me know down in the comments what you think of Bicicleta, and tell me which albums you think I should listen to. All the clips in this video of my first listen to the album are from my live stream over on Twitch, so if you'd like to join us for more full album listening parties, follow me over there at twitch.tv/Jonny Khatru. You can also join us on Discord, where you can chat with me and the community about this music. And if you enjoyed this video, please consider supporting me with the link in the description to buy me a coffee. It helps me to be able to keep making these videos and keep my channel going, so I really appreciate it. And thank you very much for watching. Until next time, take it easy.